Hi everybody, Ron Gantt here, and I want to do a short video for you today and talk about the idea of people are the solution. Now, this is something we're hearing a lot more about, right? From people like in the Safety Differently community, and it's sort of kind of confusing for some people because when you hear that term, that phrase, you immediately think of pictures like this. And there's even some that are out on social media that will use pictures like this or videos to sort of make fun of the idea, like are people really the solution? And it's sort of it makes sense to think that way, right? Are people really the solution? Because we can all think of examples where people failed. Maybe are people really the problem that we're trying to solve for? And to understand what is meant by people are the solution, I think we should dive into that idea. Are people really the problem we're trying to solve for? Because that begs an important question. Wait, what's actually the problem, right? And so let's look at that a little bit closer, because to my mind, there's two ways that we can look at this. And so the first way to look at this is when you see pictures like this, is to start with some assumptions, right? And the first assumption is that our systems and processes are basically safe as designed, right? So what we mean by that is our rules are they're not perfect, but they're good enough, and our permits and our procedures and our equipment, and it's not perfect, but it's good enough, right? And so if that's true, where does failure come from? Well, failure comes when people deviate, right? It's deviations within the system. It's when people don't follow the rules, when they don't use the permits, when they when they're not using the equipment the appropriate way. That's when we have failures, right? And so inherently then people are the problem in this mindset, right? If only this guy would have followed the procedures, we would not have had the problem. And so therefore we orient our practice to the third point, right? We want to develop processes to control or remove people from the system, right? We control them often through like incentives, right? We develop incentives, both positive and negative, positive reinforcers and punishments, or we remove people from the system altogether through automation, right? Because we can't trust them is the idea. Now, an alternate way of looking at this, though, is looking at the problem from a different perspective. Because note earlier we said that our systems and processes are basically safe. Well, that sort of implies something that we all just admit and take for granted, that our systems and processes are always flawed. And we know this, right? So, for example, maybe the problem isn't that this guy's just a bad person. Maybe the problem here is that his pump's not working. Maybe the problem here is that he's under more pressure than normal because someone took this picture, and in this particular case I happen to know it was the homeowner who took the picture, right? So the customer's watching him, so he may be under more stress. Maybe part of the problem is the incentives that are built into the system that create goal conflicts between customer service and safety, right? Maybe these are some of the problems that this guy is having to solve, right? And if that's true, then we have to take a step back and reflect on the fact that, wait a minute, those things are always present, right? They're always present. And if they're always present, wait, we don't have accidents most days. Why not? Well, it's because people create safety and success through adaptation. We'd like to think it's luck, but nobody's that lucky, right? If you're so lucky that literally 99% of the time you are successful just because of luck, quit your job, move to Las Vegas, you're going to do really well, right? That's not the way it works, though, right? We're not that lucky. There may be some luck involved, but most of our success comes from people filling the gap between our systems and processes and reality. Sometimes people call that gap the gap between work as we imagine it and work as done, right? And that gap it's important because sometimes people frame that gap as a choice that workers are making. No, that gap exists because the world is too complex to create work as done that perfectly matches work as imagined. We don't have the ability to predict everything. Some stuff we can have a pretty reasonable idea of what's going to happen, but we're not that perfect where we can predict everything, right? And so there's always some gap between how we think work happens and how it actually happens. That gap can be really small. Sometimes that gap is huge, right? And The reality is workers like this have to fill that gap on a daily basis, right? They have to. They don't have a choice in the matter, right? They have to get the work done somehow. He has to deal with the goal conflicts in the system. He has to work with a non-working pump. He has to work with customers watching him sometimes. And the thing that we should marvel at is not that this happens, but that it happens all the time, and most of the time we're successful. Right? And if that's true, then that means we have a source of success within our system that we are often taking for granted. And so if we buy into this, then we must admit, wow, people are the solution, and it's a solution we're relying on a daily basis. So how can we orient our practice based on this reality? Well, we must develop processes that support people, first of all, that work with them. I mean, the easiest way to solve this problem is to fix the darn pump, right? But also leverage the adaptation, because workers like this find ways of dealing with the inherent flaws in our system, and not all of them are bad. We see the pictures of the ones that look really bad because those are the funny ones. But how many, are happening without us even realizing it and are actually quite good? And so I hope this video was useful in sort of explaining the idea of people are the solution. If you have questions, please reach out, or if you have ideas for other videos you'd like to see, let us know.